Welcome, everyone, to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we step into a chilling case of senseless violence. A young man out for a simple dinner run who never makes it home. In the quiet streets of Edgewater, Colorado, a single shot turns an ordinary night into horror. And what happened next left investigators facing a haunting question that no one could answer right away. The parking lot looks ordinary under sodium lights, flat asphalt, painted lines, a barbecue place throwing warm smoke into the April air. Edgewater is quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that lets you hear a single footstep, a single breath, a single choice. A man steps from his car to collect dinner for the woman waiting at home. His name is Andrew Jenicek. He does not carry a weapon. He carries a wallet, a set of keys, a plan to get back before the food cools. Another car idles where shadows pool. It is small, worn, familiar to the driver who has been sleeping in it, driving it, living inside its thin metal shell. Doors crack open, words brief, blunt slice across the gap between strangers. The distance melts the way distance always does, when one person means harm and the other does not. A hand shows a gun. A second hand reaches, not for heroics, not for glory, but for the thing anyone would reach for when something sudden and ugly appears in front of your life. The shot lifts into the air like a flare. It is not dramatic. It is mechanical. It is the sound of powder and brass, doing exactly what they were built to do. Andrew folds, as if the night itself pushed down on his shoulders. The car that brought the gun does not drive around him. It does not reverse and choose mercy. Tires thump over what used to be a path home. Later, because there is always a later security glass, and fluorescent aisles will hold other images, a convenience counter, bottled drinks, laughter that doesn't fit the hour, receipts stamped with minutes. Building a timeline nobody can outrun, but that is later. For now, there is only the ground, a voice fading on a phone, and the sharp scent of cooked meat cooling in a paper bag that never makes it through a front door. Edgewater keeps its quiet. The asphalt keeps its secrets. And the faces in that idling car keep a story they think they can steer. The question is simple, and it will not go away. Was this a robbery that spiraled in a heartbeat, or something colder, planned, and far worse? To understand this night, you have to know the people who crossed paths under the hard glow of Sheridan Boulevard. At the center is Andrew Jenicek, 27 years old, raised in Colorado with the ordinary dreams that most carry into adulthood. Friends describe him as steady, the kind of man who worked, loved, and found comfort in small rituals. He was dating Jessica, and on that April night, he promised her barbecue. It was nothing grand, nothing unusual, just a quiet evening, food in a bag, a life threaded with routine. That ordinariness is what makes the violence so unbearable. Andrew was not chasing danger. It came to him. Across from Andrew's ordinary life were three young people tangled in instability and choices that hardened too soon. Alicia Valdez, 19 years old, had no fixed address. She sometimes slept in her silver Pontiac, the same car that would later roll across Andrew's body. Those who knew her say she floated between friends' couches and her boyfriend's side, trying to build a life with pieces that never quite fit. Her car was both her shelter and her trap, freedom on wheels that would also place her squarely inside a murder scene. Caleb Vigil was 20 years old, known in his circles as someone who carried a weapon. To some, he was a friend. To others, a threat. Caleb had a history of reckless behavior and was suspected in robberies that painted him as a young man choosing shortcuts that led only to walls. Devon Howard Lopez, also 20, followed a similar path. His nickname, whispered in interviews, was Silencio. He was restless, defiant, already carrying the weight of past crimes. He was in love with Alicia, and that love would become the very rope that tightened around his future. In the interrogation room, he would confess to shield her. But confessions never land the way suspects hope. On paper, these are just ages, names, and circumstances. But beneath them are the fault lines of fractured youth. They were teenagers not long ago. Now, adults standing in courts where sentences stretch longer than their lifespans. Andrew's world and theirs should never have touched. Yet on that April night they did, colliding with a single shot that ended one life and rewrote the others. The question that will follow through every interview and every courtroom exchange is this: were these youths driven by poverty, by chaos, or by something darker rooted inside? April in Colorado carries that edge where spring is never steady. The air drifts between warmth and the sudden bite of mountain chill. On the night of April 23rd, 2018, Andrew Jenicek left home for something ordinary. He was 27, steady, reliable, and Jessica, his girlfriend, had asked for barbecue. He parked near Sheridan Boulevard and walked toward the restaurant. A man about to bring food home, that was all. But another car prowled nearby, a silver two-door Pontiac, scuffed with age, engine humming under Alicia Valdez's hands. Inside sat Alicia, 19, her boyfriend Devon Howard Lopez, 20, and their associate Caleb Vigil, also 20. They were not there for food. They had been circling, restless, hungry, in a different way. Police would later link the pair of young men to robberies and reckless confrontations across Jefferson County. The Pontiac was their stage, their moving base of operations, and this night, Andrew walked into its path. Surveillance footage would later reveal the sequence. A door cracks open. A figure steps out lean, hooded, carrying a gun. Caleb Vigil. He crosses the short stretch of asphalt toward Andrew. Words may have been exchanged. Witnesses later heard only fragments. The quick rise of alarm in Andrew's voice. The sharp command from the stranger. Then the gun lifts. A black silhouette against sodium light. A single shot cracks the night. It is fast, mechanical, cruel. Andrew collapses, struck in the chest, his wallet falling beside him. A bystander named Alexis rushes to help, kneeling, pressing, calling 911, while her friend shouts the address into a phone. But the Pontiac does not pause. As Andrew lies bleeding, the car lurches forward. Tires crush over his body before the vehicle speeds into the dark. The horror is not confined to that lot. Hours later, the same Pontiac rolls into a gas station. Cameras catch the scene. Alicia at the counter, Caleb behind her, Devon at her side. They laugh. They buy snacks. Their movements are casual, almost joyful, as if nothing violent clung to them. Receipts time-stamped only minutes after Andrew's death form a brutal timeline. While Jessica waited at home for dinner that would never arrive, those responsible for ending Andrew's life were laughing under fluorescent lights, cradling junk food. Andrew died within minutes, despite Alexis's desperate CPR. Emergency responders could only confirm what the bullet had already stolen. The young man who had stepped out for barbecue would never return. His wallet, his keys. In his plans, they remain scattered on the asphalt. What lingers is the unnatural rhythm. One man gasping his last while his killers, not much older than teenagers, were already moving on to candy bars and soda. The crime scene told its own story. Powder residue, shell casings, tread marks across a human body. Witness accounts of a silver Pontiac fleeing the lot. In those first hours, police could not name the killers, but the pieces pointed with a cruel clarity toward a small group of reckless youth. And yet, within the walls of interrogation rooms, that would come later. Those same suspects would smile, deny, and weave lies that tangled even deeper. The brutality of the act was matched only by the indifference that followed. The first hours after Andrew Jenicek's death were a scramble of flashing lights, taped off asphalt, and unanswered questions. Witness Alexis gave police a clear description: a silver Pontiac, fleeing the scene. A shooter who looked like a young Hispanic male. Her account was vivid. She had seen Andrew face down, bleeding, and still tried CPR until the ambulance arrived. That detail, her attempt to keep him alive, added weight to her credibility. She was not a suspect. She was a witness haunted by a second tragedy in her life. Having once been charged as an accessory in another killing years earlier, detectives kept that in mind, but found no reason to doubt her now. CCTV cameras filled the gaps that human memory could not. Footage from nearby businesses captured the Pontiac entering the lot. A figure stepping out, the flash of a gun, and then the car surging forward. Even more damning was what came later. Images of the same Pontiac at a gas station minutes afterward, its passengers laughing and buying snacks. The timeline was indisputable. The same car at the murder scene was now recorded under bright lights with faces in plain view. Investigators had more than suspicion, they had evidence strong enough to act. Within hours, officers spotted the Pontiac on the road, weaving recklessly. A routine stop became something else when a pistol was found inside. Caleb Vigil was immediately handcuffed. The weapon matched the caliber that killed Andrew. Ballistics tests later confirmed it. The bullet dug from Andrew's chest came from that very gun. Devon Howard and Alicia Valdez were also detained. Alicia tried to remain cheerful, even during arrest, seemingly detached from the gravity of what had unfolded. But her car, her keys, her presence at the gas station bound her to the crime. The interrogations revealed the web of lies investigators had anticipated. Alicia first claimed she was driving aimlessly, picking up people she hardly knew. She downplayed her ties to Caleb, minimized Devon's role, insisted she remembered nothing about the parking lot. Detectives pressed, pointing out her keys, her ownership of the Pontiac, the security footage showing her exact movements. Each denial only deepened her entanglement. Devon, by contrast, cracked under pressure. He admitted he had been present, admitted that crimes had been committed, though he tried to shield Alicia by claiming she knew nothing. In the process, he confessed to robberies, to past violence, even to being in the car when Andrew was shot. What began as a strategy to protect his girlfriend became an avalanche of self-incrimination. He spoke of me and Caleb doing crimes, effectively confirming Caleb's role as the triggerman while binding himself as an accomplice. Detectives built their case step by step. The weapon in Caleb's possession, the gas station receipt, the eyewitness testimony, the confessions that slipped out under fluorescent lights. Prosecutors weighed the evidence and moved swiftly. Charges included first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and attempted murder tied to other incidents. Under Colorado law, even if Alicia had not pulled the trigger, her role as driver placed her inside the felony murder rule, making her as culpable as the shooter himself. By the time the case reached the district attorney's office, the narrative was firm. Andrew's killing was not random chaos. It was part of a reckless spree where robbery, intimidation, and casual violence blurred together. The indictments fell heavy. Life sentences were already looming before a jury ever heard a word. The question was no longer whether these suspects were involved, but how deeply, and whether any of them would take responsibility before the trial began. When the case reached the courtroom, the fluorescent cold of interrogation rooms gave way to the solemn weight of polished wood and the gaze of a jury. For Andrew Jenicek's family, the trial was not about legal theatrics. It was the first chance to sit face to face with those accused of cutting a life short for nothing more than impulse and cruelty. For the defendants, it was the moment their laughter at a gas station transformed into evidence under oath. Prosecutors opened with a timeline, methodical and unforgiving. They displayed still frames from CCTV. Andrew standing in the lot, Caleb Vigil stepping forward with a gun, Alicia Valdez's Pontiac positioned to flee. Then they projected the receipts from the gas station, time-stamped minutes after Andrew collapsed. The jury watched the grainy video of Alicia, Caleb, and Devon laughing as if joy had replaced bloodshed. That contrast, one man dying on the pavement, while 3 young adults bought snacks, anchored the prosecution's theme. Indifference as proof of guilt. The state presented the ballistics report next. The 9mm handgun recovered during the traffic stop was conclusively matched to the bullet lodged in Andrew's chest. An expert testified to the microscopic striations that left no doubt. The weapon in Caleb's possession was the murder weapon. Combined with Devon's recorded admissions, the narrative tightened. The defense attempted to argue that panic, not malice, had driven the shot. But prosecutors countered that panic does not explain driving over Andrew's body. Panic does not explain stopping for candy bars moments later. Witnesses were called Alexis, the bystander who tried to save Andrew, officers who conducted the stop, forensic experts who traced the evidence. Each layer reinforced the chain. The defense teams for Alicia and Devon leaned on character and circumstance. Alicia's lawyer described her as homeless, adrift, manipulated by stronger personalities. Devon's defense emphasized his youth, his impulsivity, his misguided loyalty to Alicia. Caleb's attorney attempted to cast doubt on who actually fired the gun, suggesting conflicting witness accounts. But the CCTV and Devon's slip during interrogation left little room for shadows. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense, punctuated by Jessica's quiet sobs as she listened to medical testimony about Andrew's fatal wound. Jurors shifted uncomfortably as the gas station video replayed. Every detail reminded them that this was not abstract violence. It was specific, deliberate, and immediate. The prosecution painted the 3 not as confused kids, but as predators moving together. The felony murder doctrine sealed it. Alicia, as the driver, could not distance herself from Caleb's trigger pull. Devon, by his own words, had bound himself to the crime. When closing arguments arrived, the state's attorney leaned into one final image: barbecue cooling in a bag that never made it home. The ordinariness of Andrew's errand contrasted against the recklessness of those who ended it. The defense pleaded for nuance, for mercy, for recognition that teenagers make mistakes. But the jury weighed the facts, and mistakes that end in death carry sentences written in decades, not forgiveness. The trial established guilt, but understanding why remains the darker pursuit. The psychology behind this case is not a puzzle with neat edges. It is a fractured portrait of youth colliding with violence. Start with Caleb Vigil. At 20 years old, he carried a gun as casually as others carried a phone. To prosecutors, he was the triggerman, the one who pulled steel from his pocket and ended Andrew Jenicek's life. But beneath the act is a pattern. Caleb had been tied to robberies and threats in the weeks leading up to April 23rd. He treated violence as leverage, a way to command space and respect. For a young man without stability, the weapon became both identity and insurance. In psychological terms, it is the extension of power compensating for a hollow core. He did not plan Andrew's death in detail, but when confronted with resistance, his instinct was to shoot. Impulse hardened into murder. Devon Howard Lopez, known as Silencio, reveals another side. His nickname itself suggests quiet, but in interrogation rooms, he unraveled with words. His confessions were not calculated. They spilled out in bursts, fragments of loyalty to Alicia, fragments of bravado about crimes he and Caleb had committed. Devon was 20, legally an adult, but still anchored in adolescent thinking. Protect the girlfriend at any cost, even if it meant destroying himself. His identity was inseparable from the group around him. Psychologists might call this diffuse identity, a state where young people cling to peers to define themselves, often following them into disaster. In trying to prove love, Devon signed away freedom. Alicia Valdez embodies complicity through passivity. 19. Unstable housing. Living out of a Pontiac. She did not fire the weapon, yet her car was the stage for murder. Her interviews with detectives show nervous laughter, avoidance, the restless bounce of a leg that never stopped shaking. She deflected simple questions, dodged ownership of choices. Some might argue she was manipulated, pulled by men around her. Yet the felony murder doctrine sees something else. A driver who carried a killer to the scene and sped over Andrew's body. From a psychological lens, Alicia mirrors the bystander turned participant. Her need for belonging outweighed the horror of what her car had just done. By the time she smiled at the gas station camera, her detachment had hardened into denial. For Andrew, the psychology is simpler and more devastating. He was 27, in a stable relationship, doing something ordinary for someone he loved. He was not living on the margins, not chasing trouble. His role was to remind us what was lost. Cases like this often provoke questions about prevention. What could have stopped the chain before it closed around him? But prevention cannot change the cruel imbalance. One man, grounded in routine, against three adrift in recklessness. From a legal angle, the felony murder doctrine closes gaps that psychology might leave open. It does not matter if Alicia meant to kill or if Devon thought he was only along for the ride. Their choices converged with Caleb's trigger pull. Each piece bound the others. The court did not need to define their inner motives beyond that. Yet for society, the inner motives matter. They expose how youth without anchor can weaponize boredom, loyalty, or need into lethal force. The deeper analysis is chilling. None of them looked haunted hours after Andrew's death. They laughed, bought snacks, acted as if life continued untouched. That indifference is not just legal culpability. It is psychological vacancy, the absence of empathy, the absence of pause. It is what makes this crime not only brutal, but incomprehensible. The verdicts arrived heavy and final. Caleb Vigil, the man who pulled the trigger, was sentenced to life in prison, plus more than 100 years. Devon Howard Lopez, who thought confessing might save Alicia, received life plus 279 years. Alicia Valdez, the 19-year-old whose Pontiac became the weapon as much as the gun itself, was handed life without parole under Colorado's felony murder rule. Eternity Lopez, a passenger picked up after the killing, was cleared. The gavel struck, and futures were sealed. For Andrew's family, the sentences could never balance the loss. Jessica, his girlfriend, remembered only the knock on the door, detectives in the night, and barbecue that never came home. In court, she spoke softly, her words trembling. Andrew had been steady, gentle, and deserved decades of life still ahead. His parents and siblings echoed the same emptiness that punishment may cage the guilty, but it does not bring back a son, a brother, a partner. The hole left is permanent. Public reaction carried outrage and grief. Local media covered the case with the image of Andrew's smiling face beside mugshots of defendants still so young they might have been mistaken for students. Commentators debated whether the felony murder doctrine was too harsh, but the surveillance footage of laughter at the gas station silenced much of that sympathy. To many, the image of snacks bought minutes after murder crystallized the cruelty. It was not just the killing, it was the callousness afterward that defined public memory. For law enforcement, the case was both vindication and warning. The rapid arrests, the airtight evidence trail, the confessions that spilled out all demonstrated investigative strength. Yet officers also saw how quickly youth without anchors slid into lethal violence. The overlap of robbery, intimidation, and murder revealed a culture of casual crime metastasizing among the young. Prevention felt elusive. Accountability arrived too late for Andrew. Years later, the legacy remains. Andrew Jenicek is remembered by those who loved him for the ordinariness that was taken: shared meals, quiet nights, the steady presence of a man who cared. His death stands as a reminder that violence does not always hunt those in dangerous places. Sometimes it waits in parking lots, riding inside a worn Pontiac, crossing paths with a man carrying dinner. The community remembers not just what was lost, but what it means: that empathy is fragile, that recklessness can destroy lives in seconds, and that justice, however firm, can never fully close the wound. Stories like Andrew Jenicek's remind us that violence can erupt in the most ordinary places: a parking lot, a street corner, a stop for dinner. Andrew was not walking into danger. He was carrying a bag of barbecue back to someone he loved. The same way any of us might stop for food after work or on a weekend. His death forces us to confront how quickly recklessness and indifference can turn a normal night into tragedy. The lesson here is not only about crime and punishment, but about empathy and responsibility. Caleb, Devon, and Alicia were barely out of their teens. Instead of building lives, they chose shortcuts through crime, carrying guns as casually as phones. Their choices did not just ruin their futures. They destroyed another man's life and shattered a family. It shows us that every reckless decision has ripples that can never be undone. So I ask you, what do you think fuels crimes like this? Is it poverty, broken homes, peer influence, or something deeper about how we value human life? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like Andrew's deserve to be told not for shock, but for awareness, please give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can keep shining light on the truth. And maybe, in that light, prevent another life from being stolen on an ordinary American night.